Okay, welcome back to our lesson about the Gilded Age. Yesterday, we were learning about corporations, and I was trying to explain what corporations were and how they work. Essentially, a corporation is a business that is separated legally from a person, okay? And unlike a sole proprietorship where the person who owns the business, like that is their possession and that they are tied to and they're legally liable for, a corporation is not tied to a person. It's easily transferable in ownership, okay? It's like, and it acts kind of like a person because a corporation can get into contracts, a corporation pays taxes, corporation hires people, fires people, buys stuff, sells stuff, etc. Corporations can be sued, and which is a good thing for the corporation owners because the corporation gets sued instead of them personally getting sued, okay? But the way it works is that whenever you want to start a business and you need a lot of money, like you're going to build a giant factory, okay? You can't just do it on your own most of the time. There are some people that are super big billionaires. They can buy their own business completely outright. But most of the time, people have to organize into things called joint stock companies, where a stock is a share of ownership, okay? A lot of times they'll refer to stocks as shares, okay? So we talked about Mr. Brown's Bakery. That's $10,000 in value. He broke it up into 1,000 shares, okay? So the price per share is going to be $10, okay? All right. If Mr. Brown owns 300 shares at $3,000 in value, he is, with 300 shares, he is the 30% owner of the business, and the value of his stock is $3,000. Now, what that means is that a lot of times these corporations have like thousands and thousands of stocks, okay, or even more. And you buy little tiny shares of that company, and it's broken up into small, manageable bits that people can, buy and sell and trade, okay? What this allows you to do is allows you to build very large businesses. It allows you to pool the money of lots of investors. But why would you want to buy a stock in a business instead of just owning a business all on your own? Well, you see, as an investor, you can put your money into businesses and they can become profitable and you can make money off of those profits. Let me explain. Let's say that you buy just one share. You don't have a whole lot of money, but you buy one share of Mr. Brown's Bakery. So that's one share, that's $10, okay? So we're just gonna write on the board our investment, okay? So in year 0, you buy one share. That share is priced at $10 per share. So the value of your investment is $10, okay? Let's say that over the next year, Mr. Brown's Bakery does very well. They start making a lot of more cookies. They increase the amount of flavors that they have. They advertise well. Thanks to all these new investors, they're able to add a new location. And by the end of year 2, the value of the company, so the company value in year 0 was $10,000. Let's say in year 1, the value is now $15,000, okay? That's a really big jump. So now one share is going to be $15, okay? And so that means the value of your investment is now $15 and your profit per share is $5. And if you bought one share and you just sat on it for a year, you could sell it at the end of the year and make $5, okay? There are some people who literally do this for a living. They buy and they sell stocks. They buy companies where the stocks are cheap, but they believe that they are going to grow in value. And when companies start to lose money and they think they're going to fail, they sell and they pocket the difference, okay? You could, if you are a smart investor, you could go on year 2 and let's say it's continued to grow. Now, your stock is worth $20 a share. You could sell the stock and buy stock in a different company, etc. Okay, so as you make money in the stock market, you can make more investments and make more money in the stock market. And the stock market is basically the place, and it's mainly in New York, but now like the stock market happens on the internet. But it's essentially the place where people buy and sell shares of ownership of companies. What this has done is it has allowed for a system called capitalism. Okay, capital refers to like the money and investment and things you need to make other things. Okay, and so in capitalism, it's all about people having the freedom to buy, and to sell, and to own property, to own businesses, to start businesses. It's a system marked by freedom, that people can use their money in ways that they think will benefit them. But what happens in capitalism is that everyone benefits. As people invest in the stock market, we are talking about literally companies growing. Companies having more money to invest in businesses, to create more products, to hire more workers, okay? The stock market is seen as one measurement of the health of the economy. Now, the stock market can get kind of funky, and people will play like games with the stock market, like you probably heard in like recent news, the whole thing about like GameStop or whatever, okay? What's going on there? I don't have any into it because I'm not a financial person. But basically, people are manipulating the stock market to make more money because there are things about the stock market that are not always logical. A lot of the stock market is based on emotion, and you're trying to predict what companies will make money and what companies will lose money, okay? And so panic can set in the stock market when people think everything's about to fall apart and they start to sell, and that can actually make the problem worse, okay? Or when people are excited and they start buying things, sometimes they get too excited and they buy too much stock, and then you create a bubble and then it pops. We may be seeing a bubble develop in the economy right now. So you can't look at the stock market for everything, but typically when you see the stock market go up, that usually means that good things are happening in the economy and people think we're going to be making more money. Okay?
So are you kind of talking about like the whole Reddit thing where people were
Yes.
saying do this, and everybody was doing it?
Yes. So what's happening in most of human history, or like most of history in like the stock market, the people that are really playing the stock market are the significantly more wealthy people. Okay, the people who have a lot of money, who operate like hedge funds, and they like do investments on the stocks on a grand scale. Okay, but in more recent times, thanks to the internet, it's much more easier for individual people to become their own investors and buy and sell stocks on the stock market like the big companies do, which is good. It's a good thing. Okay, it's actually led to a lot of like democracy in the stock market of sorts. But what has typically happened is that like the big people that really own money, and this kind of gets in this, what happens in the Gilded Age is kind of what we deal with even today. There's a select few people who use the stock market to use their wealth to become enormously wealthy, and their money makes more money. And you get to the point where you never have to work. You just sit around and you use your money to make more money, and then that money makes more money, and that money makes more money, and then you're, sitting around as a billionaire. Okay.
That's what Coach Dunn used to do, right?
Okay, some people do play in the stock market. So like Coach Dunn, he did use the stock market to make money. Now, he was not quite at that point where, he didn't have to have a day job, but there are people who like, that's what they do. A lot of people, including me, invest money in the stock market for retirement planning. Okay, so like right now I'm working and I have a paycheck, but a certain percentage of my check goes every month to buying things in the stock market, so that hopefully when I retire, they'll have gone up and I can sell those stocks and live off of that. Okay, that's like the idea. And that's like, have you ever heard of a 401k? That's what it is. It's when people have a retirement plan where they're buying stock in the stock market. Lots of people do it. But when you get into the day trading stuff, that's a little bit more edgy. See, like I don't go and individually buy my own stock. I have a guy, okay, his name is Cliff. He's got this financial company, and he every month I put a certain amount of money into an account, and he goes and he does investment things, and then we make money. Okay. And then, every few months he sends me like a little piece of paper that says, this is how much money we made. And I say, that's good. Okay. Anyway, good job, Cliff. Well, it's his company. But anyways, so it's not just Cliff, but he's the guy I talk to. Anyways, but that's how most people do it. Like, I don't look at the stock market. I just do it. I picked like the safest and least risky stocks I possibly could, basically. And that way I'm pretty sure it's going to make money and I'm not going to lose a whole lot. Okay. Typically, the stuff that makes a lot of money tends to also be the stuff that can lose a lot of money. It's risky. It's like gambling. When you take a safe bet, you don't make as much money on a return, but you're less likely to lose. When you take a risky bet, you're more likely to lose, but if you win, you can win big. So anyways, what happens in the stock market is some people, they go and they play hardball, they gamble. Okay, the big people with lots and lots of money, they can do that and it's not a really big worry. But smaller investors, that's kind of scary. Well, what's happened is that on Reddit, thanks to the internet, the small investors have realized that if they all work together, they can basically be just like a big investment company. And they can actually manipulate the stocks by all working together in concert. And so we're not going to get all this, and I'm not an expert. But there's this concept in the stock market called shorting, which is where you bet that a stock will lose money. So you borrow a stock, you sell it at a high price, and then when the stock loses money, you buy it back at a low price, and then you give it back to the person that you borrowed the stock from. It's a really weird concept, and honestly, I don't like it very much. But what happened is the big investors thought that GameStop was going to fail. So they bet on shorts. They do shorts where they believe that the stock market is going to fail. So all the people on Reddit, they said, look, everybody's betting that the thing is going to fail. If we all buy stocks in GameStop, and guess what? Everyone just got a $600 stimulus check, okay? So a lot of people are using their stimulus check or whatever, $600 extra. Sure, I'll just throw it in the stock market and see what happens. And they're buying GameStop, which is making GameStop rise in money, which means that the billionaire hedge funds that think that they thought it was going to fail, they're actually losing money. So it's become this big, nasty tug of war that's going on. It's kind of funny. But anyways, but what's going on right now is the conflict between the little guy and the big guy, which is what was actually going on during the Gilded Age. There are a select few people in America that become gigantic billionaires. Okay, some of the very first millionaires ever. Eventually we get, they're not quite billionaires yet. The number, inflation happens, but you see some people become very, very wealthy and very rich. There are people with extravagant, inventions and palaces and all this, basically just living completely high on the hog. But whereas most people that work for corporations, they are getting by with the very bare minimum. And so you see the labor and toil of the regular guy is what helps support the lavish lifestyle of the rich. Because those stocks that they're betting on are actually companies where people work. GameStop is an actual company. There are people that work at GameStop. Their jobs are on the line with all this weird volatility of the stock market. Okay, they could perhaps see an expansion of their business. They could see a retraction of their business. We're playing with people's eyes, but that's what you're actually betting on, real companies. And sometimes people in the stock market, they just look at the numbers and they don't think about the things actually happening because of those numbers. So the people that become the most wealthy and the most famous during the Gilded Age are sometimes called captains of industry and are sometimes called robber barons. Okay? Captains of industry is the nice name, right? These are the leaders in the economy. And it's true. Without these people, the United States would not have grown as much as it did. Without these people, we would not have the prosperity that we have today. Okay? These business owners, they created thousands of jobs. They built cities, skyscrapers, railroads, powered all sorts of things. They created so much wealth. But most of that wealth they created went to them. Now, a rising tide raises all ships. That's kind of like the metaphor for capitalism. If the whole country gets richer, it's better for everyone. even if some people get much richer than everyone else. Like overall, the country grows and prospers. But when you look at like who gets most of the pie, it's usually the people at the top, those big corporation leaders. And we have what are also called the robber barons, you know, the lords over their own little like industrial kingdoms. Okay. Now, there are many, many different examples of robber barons. I'm not going to teach you all of them. I don't have that much time, and I don't want to. I'm going to teach you about these three because I think they're important. Okay. Andrew Carnegie, John D Rockefeller, and John P. Morgan, or also known as J.P. Morgan. Back during this time period, the economic philosophy of the United States government is something called Laissez Faire. Lissezfaire. Laissez Faire. It's a word in French. I don't know if I've taught you Laissez Faire yet. Have I?
No.
Okay, so it's a French word. The idea of capitalism believes in this philosophy called the invisible hand, okay? All right? Adam Smith, he was probably the most influential economist in history. Adam Smith is the guy who really put a lot of the ideas of capitalism to paper. And one idea they popularized this idea called the invisible hand. The invisible hand is this idea that in the economy, self-interest leads to everyone's prosperity. Okay? Self-interest benefits all. Okay? In economics, you need to understand this concept of scarcity. Okay? I mean, laissez-faire is coming. Okay? Scarcity is the idea that there's not enough. There's not enough. There is an unlimited number of wants in this world, and there is a limited number of resources. So not everyone can get what they want because there's scarcity. Okay? You'll never be satisfied. You can get all the money in the world that you want more money. Okay? Right? Your bakery can become super successful, Mr. Brown, but you're always going to want more money. You'll never be satisfied. So you know, with earthly things. That's why you should seek satisfaction not from the earth, but from heaven. Anyways, because there's not enough, governments have to decide how to distribute resources. That's economics. How to distribute resources. How do we decide who gets what? In communism, the government owns everything and distributes everything as it sees fit. But in capitalism, the government stays out of it. And instead, self-interest benefits all. Here's how it works. People want food. So they farm. Farmers get good at making food because people are lazy. People don't want to work. So we try to figure out the ways to work the least and get the most food that we possibly can. Okay, so we develop new time-saving techniques like tractors, new fertilizers, etc. So that more people can grow, so less people can grow more food. Okay? People who don't make food, now there's more room in the economy, people can find other things. People want clothes, right? Okay? So they're willing to trade some of their food for clothes. So now you have an economy. You have people trading resources. You have specialization. Okay? People want something, they're willing to pay money for it. Somebody's going to come up with a way to get it to them. Okay? As long as there is a demand, there's going to be supply for it. And so in capitalism, what determines prices and what determines what is created and what is made are the laws of supply and demand. Okay? When the demand for a good is high, there will be supply to demand it. Okay? If people really want something, people are going to come up with ways to make it. People want cell phones, companies are going to start making cell phones. Okay? People want food, farmers are going to make food, etc. As long as they have money. Does that make sense? Now, when you talk about prices, how things cost, how we make things, we're driven to be efficient and we're driven to be as profitable as possible. So people are going to always look for the cheapest deal, the best deal. When you go to buy a hamburger, you're going to make your decision based off of that. What is the best hamburger? You're going to look at the best price. versus the best quality of hamburger. If a hamburger is overpriced, you're not going to buy it. If it's crappy, you're not going to buy it. So competition, self-interest, different burger companies are going to compete to provide you the most delicious burger they possibly can at the lowest price because they want your money. In capitalism, no one has to tell anyone to do anything. You don't have the government telling people what to produce and when to produce it and where to give it. The government doesn't manage hamburger distribution. That happens naturally. It sorts itself out like an invisible hand guiding us in our decisions. And that invisible hand is self-interest. What is going to be best for me? I have decided to get this job because this job is going to help me have the best income that I possibly can have so I can get all the other things that I want. My employer has hired me because they think I'm the best employee for this thing. They want a good employee. I want the money. Out of self-interest, I work for them. That's how it works. I'm going to go to the store and buy something. I'm going to make a decision based on my self-interest to buy a product that I think is the best product for the best price. That's going to tell the companies that this is what they want, and it'll lead to competition as different companies compete for my business. Okay? It's all happening naturally without anything going in to interfere. In most capitalist societies, especially in the 1800s, there was a desire to make sure that nothing interfered with the natural happenings of the economy. Supply, demand, this invisible hand, all that was natural, and there's no need for government regulation. And so we had a philosophy called Laissez Faire. Laissez Faire is French for hands off, okay? So I'm gonna teach you Laissez Faire. Everybody put your hands on the table. When I say Laissez Faire, I want you to take your hands off, okay? Laissez Faire. Laissez Faire. Hands off. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Laissez Faire. Laissez Faire. Okay, let's put it back down. Ready? Laissez Faire. Okay, put it back. Laissez Faire. So what does laissez faire mean? Hands off. The government is going to leave it alone. The government's going to let it do its own thing. During this time period, the government doesn't really get involved in the economy. Okay? Government doesn't tell businesses what to do. Doesn't really tell people what to do with their own property. Okay? If it's your property, if it's your business, if it's your money, you do whatever you want with it. Don't break the law. Don't kill people. Don't steal stuff. That sort of thing. But if you want to start a business and pay your employees a penny an hour, that's your deal, bro. Self-interest is going to govern it. If you pay your employees too low, they're not going to work for you. They're going to go find a job somewhere else where they pay better. At least that's the idea, okay? As long as there's competition, capitalism works. When there's no competition, that's when capitalism falls apart, okay? Today, most capitalist societies have anti-monopoly measures to preserve competition. Because for capitalism to work, you have to have competitiveness, okay? You have to have multiple gas stations in town to keep the price of gas low. If you have only one gas station in town, they can charge whatever they want, right? Okay? You have to have competition. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. But during the 1800s, there wasn't really any rules to preserve competition. We were so thoroughly laissez-faire that we didn't get involved at all in the economy. And this allowed for certain people to become very, very wealthy, okay? Andrew Carnegie, John D Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan, okay? Yes, you may, okay? So, Andrew Carnegie, he was a Scottish immigrant to the United States before the Civil War. He is actually a true rags to riches story. He came to the United States as like a young kid with like no money in his pocket. And he was basically just got off the boat. He's just a person. But he worked his way up through businesses. He got jobs. He worked hard. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps. And eventually he started to have his own business. He made wise investments. He had a very good plan for his business. And he ultimately became one of the most powerful steel producers in America. Okay? His U.S. Steel Company owned, I'll explain. He owned what's called a vertical monopoly. And he basically had like the corner on the steel business. Everybody wanted to steal, everybody's using his steel, and he becomes one of the most wealthy and powerful people in America, okay? He used the Bessemer process to produce steel, and steel is what drove a lot of the economy, okay? Everybody's building railroads. Steel industry is a great place to be, right? Okay, if you're betting on stocks and you see a steel corporation in the 1870s, you want to buy steel because that steel is going to be sold to railroad companies, it's going to be sold to building skyscrapers, and so all that growth in the U.S. economy directly contributed to Andrew Carnegie becoming very wealthy. Now, Andrew Carnegie, though, of all the monopolists, Andrew Carnegie is like the nicest one, okay? Some of these people are jerks, like John D Rockefeller, jerk, okay? They do a really bunch of shady stuff, okay? And Andrew Carnegie, I'm sure he did some bad stuff too. But Andrew Carnegie, he was a philanthropist, okay? He gave a lot of money away. Philanthropist actually literally means a lover of humanity. And he loved people. And he remembered what it was like to be poor. And so when he became rich, he donated lots and lots of his money to different projects to help people out that were poor. One thing that he advocated for was this idea called the gospel of wealth. The idea that God, who's in control of everything, decides who is rich and who is poor. And so Andrew Carnegie believed that God had blessed him with wealth, and therefore it was his duty to use that wealth that God gave him to bless others. Okay, and so Andrew Carnegie did a lot of nice things. He helped build hospitals, he helped build libraries, he built museums. One thing that he really wanted was for people who were poor to have an education. Andrew Carnegie felt that education was the big difference maker between someone being poor and someone being wealthy. And so Andrew Carnegie donated a lot of money to build libraries all across the country. Okay, and this is really important during a time when school is not really required or standardized for a lot of people in the United States. And a lot of children at this point in time are working in factories. Okay, so this was like before the government started making people go to school, philanthropy was a way to help sponsor schools and sponsor libraries and sponsor education. During this period of time, when I say laissez-faire, I mean laissez-faire. The government didn't do a whole lot, okay? People are poor, tough, okay? You can't afford to send your kids to school? Okay, I guess they'll work in the factory. It's not our problem. And people didn't even expect that. Does that make sense? Like, it was not something you just thought the government was just going to do. It wasn't the government's job to care about how much money you had or whether you had a place to stay or whether your kids went to school. Philanthropy took that role. When people were hard on their luck or poor or downtrodden, the idea was that they would rely on philanthropy organizations like churches or wealthy industrialists that wanted to do something nice. Okay, and so Andrew Carnegie, he's not a horrible person, but he does make a lot of money off of using workers that are paid very, very little in bad working conditions. Okay, that's Andrew Carnegie. John D Rockefeller is a different story. John D Rockefeller is ruthless. Okay. He formed the Standard Oil Company in Cleveland, Ohio, and before his time was up, he at one point owned about 90% of the oil refineries in the United States. Okay, he literally owned almost all the gas in America. Okay, imagine if 90% of the gas stations in America were owned by the same company. Okay, you could have towns, you could have even entire states where they could just jack up the price of gas to $6 a gallon, and you'd have to pay it because you have no other options. Okay, a monopoly is when one person owns all of an industry or one company. Okay, monopolies became more and more popular during the Gilded Age. As you see these big businesses, they start to snowball. So what John D Rockefeller would do, he would get a successful oil business going and he'd buy out his competition. The little tiny independent gas companies, he would drive them out of business by charging lower prices, and then he'd buy them up, okay? So let's imagine that you're John D Rockefeller. You've got big, deep pockets, okay? And so there's a little town, and there's one gas station. Let's call it the mom and pop, okay? Because that's what a lot of times people call these small businesses. Mom and pop gas station, and they charge $2 a gallon for gas, okay? Fair price, normally not something people are going to be upset about. Well, John D. Rockefeller, he puts a gas station in town, and this is not really a gas station, it is oil refineries, but I'm simplifying this to make it make sense. He comes into town, he charges 50 cents, okay? Now, they don't have the money to sell their gas at 50 cents. He's actually losing money, but because he's got such a big company and all these deep pockets, he can afford to lose money here for a few months, okay? Well, a few months pass and everybody starts getting gas over here, and eventually they go out of business. They run out of money. And so then John D. Rockefeller says, hey, I'll buy your business. I'll pay you some money for it. So now this is John D. Rockefeller's too, okay? So now he owns both gas stations. And now that he's the only one that owns any gas stations, now he can raise the price to $10 a gallon. And no one can do anything to stop him, because he's the only one that has gas stations, okay? He really did like have America by the string. Like the US military, our Navy, depended on John D. Rockefeller to sell us oil, okay? So you have a point when have people that are so wealthy, so rich, that they can basically do whatever they want. And there's not much that can be done to stop them during the Gilded Age, okay? J.P. Morgan, he was an investment banker, and he did all kinds of different things, but basically he's the guy that would use his money to make more money, okay? He would invest in lots of different companies. He would buy monopolies. He had monopolies in railroads. He had monopolies in all sorts of different things. He invested in multiple different types of businesses, and he created trusts, okay? A trust is like a monopoly. A trust is like a monopoly, but where a monopoly is one person owning one person or business, a trust is like two or three. 2, 3, 5, a few companies that have trusted each other to charge the same prices, okay? Instead of competing with each other to have lower and lower prices, they just say, hey, let's all raise prices of gas to $3 a gallon tomorrow. So if tomorrow all the gas stations in Sulphur Springs all decided to charge $3 a gallon, they got together and had a secret meeting and they decided to do that, that would be a trust. And they all have to trust each other to keep prices the same. So that way there's no competition and people just have to pay the extra money for the gas, okay? These sort of business enterprises were actually really common in the United States during the Gilded Age. And what they ultimately did was they benefited the rich and powerful to make even more money, and they made life for average, ordinary Americans much worse. So how these monopolies work, there's two different types, vertical integration and horizontal integration. Andrew Carnegie, he did the vertical integration stuff. John D. Rockefeller, he did horizontal. So Andrew Carnegie, when he made steel, he owned every single part of the steel industry. He owned the mines where the iron ore came from. He owned the mining company that would harvest the iron. He owned the transportation that took the iron ore to the refineries. He owned the refineries that took the iron ore and turned it into steel. And then he owned the distribution places that sold the steel to other companies. He owned everything. Okay, now I'm simplifying it, and the details are a little bit different, but essentially that's what he's doing. He owns every step of production. It's like if you were going to, like McDonald's. McDonald's does this all the time, okay? McDonald's has their own farms, okay? They have their own farms, they have their own cows, they have their own slaughterhouses, they have their own refrigerated railroad cars to transport the meat, they have their own warehouses and meat packing plants, they have their own delivery trucks, and they have their own restaurants that sell the burgers, okay? If you eat a McDonald's burger or chicken, it's probably owned by McDonald's from the top to the bottom, okay? Now, when you do that, you cut costs, and it makes it more efficient. Because if you're buying it at each level, then you're having to pay middlemen, right? If you own a farm that grows the wheat, and then you have to hire somebody to transport that wheat from the farm to the bakery, then, or the barn to the manufacturing plant, you have to pay that driver, right? But if it's your driver, then it can be in your own business, it can be easier. You don't have to you cut out the middleman, you make things more efficient. That's how Andrew Carnegie made his money, okay? John D. Rockefeller, he's a big fan of horizontal immigration. where you purchase competing companies in the same industry. Okay, so one big Standard Oil company under John D Rockefeller, he would drive out of business all the little tiny mom and pops and take them over. So McDonald's, they do like the vertical integration, okay? Walmart, they're kind of the people that do like the horizontal integration. Not quite the same, but when Walmart moves into a town, a lot of times the small local grocery stores, they go out of business because they can't compete with the prices, okay? That's how it works. So these are problems. And America is dealing with these problems. And we really don't solve these problems till we get to a president named Teddy Roosevelt. So just keep that in mind. There are these people that are super rich and they can do basically whatever they want. And they're taking away competition. It'll get solved, but not just yet, okay? For many people in America, life revolved around the factory. And life in the factory is very different from life in the farm. You're on the clock. Factories, in order to be efficient, they would reduce jobs to the most simple processes they possibly could, therefore allowing the workers to be trained quickly, to be able to get the work done very fast and efficiently, and it meant you didn't have to pay your workers very much, okay? Working conditions in American factories were not good, okay, by any stretch of the imagination. At this point in time, the government is laissez-faire, they're hands off. There's no minimum wage. There's no government safety rules for how businesses have to operate. Okay, there's no overtime hours. Okay, most Americans, you see somewhere between 10 to 12-hour shifts. Okay, very common, 6 days a week, usually get Sunday off. Okay, if you are a man, you're going to get paid more than a woman. But factories love to hire kids. They don't have to pay them that much. And their tiny little hands can reach into moving parts easier than big, meaty adult hands, okay? All right, so in fact, there's a lot of kids working in factories, there's a lot of women working in factories, there's a lot of men working in factories, and they're working long hours in very cramped, dangerous conditions, okay? A lot of times, factories will have like overseers or foremen that'll like stay on the workers constantly to keep them working. And there's some businesses where they like dock workers' pay if they like take a break without getting permission. Okay, constantly working. Okay, there's no workers' compensation, and there's not really safety rails places. That's a waste of money. You're trying to make money. You don't want to waste money on safety rails or safety helmets or all those extra protections. That's cutting the profit margin. You don't have to buy a fire sprinkler system. That's a waste of money. Okay, if a worker gets their hand caught in the machine and it gets all mangled up, sorry, you're fired. You can't work here anymore because your hand's screwed up. Why'd you screw up your hand? This is a dumb idea. Go home. Okay? If you get sick and you can't come to work, you're not going to get sick days off. Okay? If you're a woman and you get pregnant, you're probably not going to get, maternity leave. Maybe they'll let you work and get off for the day you have the baby, but, or you might just get fired when they see that you're pregnant and you can't work. All right. There's a lot of unfair conditions in factories, and workers, they're struggling. Now, to be perfectly clear, for a worker in the United States, in a factory, if you work and you get a decent job and your wife works and your kids work and you don't get sick, nothing really bad happens, you'll probably have enough money to survive, to live an okay life, maybe save up a little bit, maybe be able to go to the movies, the vaudeville show on Friday night, maybe go to the baseball game, share an apartment with another family so you can afford rent. You'll probably scrape by. But if one bad thing happens, you're out of luck, okay? There's no safety net. When you're old, you better hope that your kids are able to take care of you or you can keep working until you die because there's not a safety net, okay? Today, we have things like Social Security, we have workers' compensation, we have paid medical leave. We have all these different overtime hours, minimum wage laws. All these protections for workers did not exist during the Gilded Age, okay? Now, people willingly chose to go to the factories. No one was forcing them to do it. And sometimes people get into situations where they can't say no. But a lot of Americans left farms to move to the cities to get jobs in factories. So that is evidence that apparently they could survive. And people did survive. And most people get by. But if you get unlucky, Sorry. There's not really any sympathy, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about these factories. Probably the most infamous factory incident actually happened a little bit after or later in this time period in 1911 in New York City at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, okay? So it was a factory that turned cloth into like pieces of cloth that would then be used to like make shirts and stuff. So they made like a specific part of cloth for clothing, okay? And it was a factory full of women, okay? And in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, what happened is that it was women working in this factory, and they're working, and you kind of see, this is like a cloth factory where they're like spinning thread into cloth, okay? But what you notice is that in these shops, it's loud, there's lots of noise, and there's a lot of, I'm trying to find the exact, I want to find the exact statistics on the numbers before I tell you wrong. Oh, well, I'll just tell you the story. I'll get the numbers wrong, okay? But there's several hundred women working in this factory floor, and they're on like the 6th floor of a business in the skyscraper, so they're really high up. And that factory, it's loud, it's noisy, and the factory's upset because some of their workers are sneaking off to take breaks without permission. And so they start locking the doors to the factory during the shift. They also notice that some workers sneak out onto the fire escape to take breaks without permission. So they lock up the windows, they make them unable to get through, and then they get rid of the ladders on the fire escape, okay? So the factory's loud, it's full of cloth. You know how like when you take your socks off after a long day, there's lots of little like cloth things or like the lint that comes out of the dryer? There's lint everywhere. Lint is flammable, okay? And somewhere, somehow, a piece of metal hits another piece of metal, there's a spark, something happens, and the thing catches on fire. The workers, they try to escape. They run to the door, but the door is locked. They beat on the door, they try to get through the door. It's getting smoky, it's getting dark, it's getting really, really hot, and it's loud, and all these women are like screaming in crowds trying to get out. Some of them go to the windows are locked. They break open the windows to get on the fire escape is gone. I think it's around like 120 or 130 women died that day from the fire and from like jumping off to their death. It got really bad. Anyways, but there's no safety in these factories. There's a lot of problems. So next week, our plan is to talk about how workers fought against this to make change, okay? You guys have a great week. Do good things, be good people, make good choices. So next week, we should learn about unions and how workers tried to make conditions better, okay? Have a good day.